In this lesson, we're going to start looking at measurement. And in the book, A Light in the Attic by Shel Silverstein, there are a couple poems that are applicable to the idea of why we need to measure, and also how we measure items can be different. The first poem that I thought we would talk about is How Many, How Much? How many slams in an old screen door? Depends how loud you shut it. How many slices in a bread? Depends on how thin you cut it. How much good inside a day? Depends how good you live 'em. And how much love inside a friend depends on how much you give 'em. So in this poem, we see a need for having some boundary or some basis for measuring. How many slams in an old screen door? How many slices of bread? Another poem in this book that I particularly like, and it allows for estimation, and it's titled The Snake Problem. And it says, "It's not that I don't care for snakes, but oh, what do you do when a 24-foot python says," if I can get the book under there, "I love you." So if it takes 24 feet for this python to say, "I love you," how long is 24 feet? Is it the length of your desk? Is it the length of your foot? The length of your classroom? So it allows a beginning for talking about estimating. Geometry means earth measure. The Egyptians used geometry as a practical way of life. They laid out their towns so that they would be easily traveled. They laid out their crops, and they built their farms and their homes in areas that were not flooded. So the Egyptians were a practical user of geometry. The Greeks, however, were more theoretical. And Euclid, which is our father of geometry, we still use his theories today, and much of his work is what our geometry as we know it is made of. Now, in pages 1 and 2 of your textbook, you will be looking at measuring and measuring with some non-standard units of measure. We say that measurement is a process that enables the comparison and quantification of objects and events in the real world. So when students are first learning about measurement, they should use informal tools to measure by. And so as you begin to give them segments or give them the length of the textbook, the length of their fingers, you can give them some sour gummy bears to use, or you can give them some erasers, or anything, paper clips, raisins, any non-standard unit of measure. And you would have them, what I would like to do would be put them into stations, with each station having a different object to use. And I would have each of them measure a segment and say, if segment TP is measured by group number 1, how long is that segment? And so they would say a little bit more than 3 units. Now the students that had something else to measure by, let's say the student that has this would say, well, I think it's just a little bit more than 1 unit long. And hence the discussion for a need for standard units of measure. They're going to tell you, hey, if we don't all have the same thing to measure with, we're not going to get the same answer. And so then you are allowing them to discover the need for standardized measure. Instead of you telling them that, they are able to form that opinion on their own. And that's a good math lesson. Research shows that students that have good spatial skills are good problem solvers. So solving a problem is the ultimate goal for a mathematics classroom. And so we want then to be able to allow the students many opportunities to develop spatial skills. So before they measure, they should estimate. So you might give them some activities where they are using their thumb to measure by. They're using their hand. Their hand is just their 4 fingers. And they're using their span, which is from the thumb to the end of the fingers. And so even using those, they're going to find that if they measure their desk using their hand, you have little hands and big hands and medium-sized hands. Sounds like a Dr. Seuss book. But they are going to see that, well, a hand is not going to be a very good measuring tool because we can all get different answers. Using their foot, using a pace, and then they need to decide, if I want to measure the door, should I use my thumb, my hand, or my span? If I want to measure my textbook, should I use my hand, my thumb, the span? If I want to use, find the measure of the length of the classroom, should I use a foot or should I use a pace? So then the students, after practicing with non-standard units, they need to come up with, well, which unit would be best for different situations. So the process of measurement is they would choose a unit, they would estimate the number of units, they would actually measure and report their answer with the units, and then evaluate as to whether their estimate was a reasonable estimate or not. Now, in the middle grades, we need to make sure that the problems that we are giving them are not contrived. They need to be real world application kind of problems. We need to make them active, experiment. We need to have them work with models, and we need them to not be a passive observer. Also, in measurement, we need to make sure that they validate their answers, that they estimate, they make conjecture, and then that they are owners of that measurement. We think that probably in the beginning that the standard foot came from the length of King Louis XIV of France. And we, however, seem to be one of the few countries that continue to hang on to the English system of measure, where we use inches, feet, miles, yards, pounds, ounces. Because there are so many different measures that go with those, it's very difficult for us to convert sometimes. And so now most countries are using the metric system because of the convenience of measure. There is a book that is nice to use in this lesson, and it's called How Big is a Foot?, written and illustrated by Rothmeiler. And in this book, the author illustrates the importance of having a standard unit of measure. So the king decides he wants to give a very nice present to the queen. And so he gets his carpenter to come and tells him that he wants him to make the queen a bed. And so the king measures the queen, and he finds that she is 3 feet wide and 6 feet long. And that is using the king's feet. So the carpenter is a very small little person. Therefore, when he makes the bed using his little tiny feet, he makes the bed way too small. Therefore, the queen will not fit in. The king is so disappointed. He sends the carpenter to jail. And while the carpenter is in jail, he begins to think about what could have been wrong. And he realizes that his foot and the king's foot are not the same. So he asks for another try, and he makes a cast of the king's foot and measures, and then is able to make the queen a bed, and she is very happy and the king is very happy, and hence an understanding and a reason for having standardized units of measure, so that every foot that is measured is the same length. Some other activities that can be done in the class to give students opportunities to estimate is how many peas would it take to cover the floor of the classroom? So if you had some bags of black-eyed peas and you measure off a section of the classroom and have the students spread the black-eyed peas out, then they would be able to make an estimate of how many bags it would take. Another way to get students to estimate is to ask them, how many basketballs would it take to fill our classroom? Or you could use beach balls. But to do this, they're going to first estimate how many it would take, and then after they've done estimation, then they are going to actually section off a portion of the classroom and come up with a plan to test their conjecture.